Hey everybody, we are live. Congratulations, you made it through the week. Another successful week of food safety, food quality, protecting the public, putting out kick-ass products. And we are really, really proud of you. And if nobody else says it, I'm making Jill and Tia laugh. If nobody else says it, good job. You did a good job this week, right? And a lot of times in what we do, there's nobody out there saying that because if we're successful, nobody notices, but we do. So good job. If you're new to the food safety chat, first of all, welcome. Pull up a seat and join us for the next hour. What you'll notice is this is a conversation around food safety and careers and these type of things. And it's not a lecture. It's not us going, rah, rah, rah. Here's the things that you have to do. This is us interacting, and what you'll see too, and this was very true this week as well when I was on Jill and Tia's show, is the interaction is so cool, right? And we'll get side conversations going in the chat and all these type of things. So we encourage you to do that. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is let us know where in the world you are at. I am in beautiful Loveland, Colorado, and I'll stick that in here now. Bam, there we go. A little emerald action there, where it's going to be mid 80s or so today. Tia, where are you at today?
I am in Baltimore. I'm in Baltimore, and it's a great morning. The sun is shining. Hopefully, we will have sun all weekend long. Even though I think rain is coming at some point.
And that's not a bad thing. And Jill, where are you at today?
Well, I'm over in Minnesota, and we're having like perfect summer days the next week. So, Tim, I see you there, and I see you're like, hi from Tennessee.
Tennessee.
I'm excited that you moved there, but I'm also like, you're missing out on these good days right now. So, I'm glad that you're here. Thanks.
Yeah, the Knoxville, beautiful campus.
It is. It is.
Really nice. So Tim, Cara, of course, we're so happy Cara's here. Lance, look at all these awesome people on the show.
From Wisconsin. Hey, Laura, from Wisconsin. I'm a Badger.
Another Nashville, Tennessee up there. Robert. Robert. Looks like Robert's back. If you're, I think I've said this on here before, but it's very true. If you're not connected with Robert, connect with Robert. And he's been very busy. So if you guys haven't noticed on LinkedIn, the dude's been all over the world, going to Vietnam and all kinds of other places with his work. And so
amazing.
Hopefully it's been uneventful travel, Robert.
Hi, Robert. Hi, Duncan. It has been a while. Good to see you.
Awesome. So it's very cool too, right? So we have our regulars who join us, and we're super appreciative for them, and then new people too. So welcome. I think you're going to enjoy this. Yes. So with this then, well, first off, I guess a little bit of introduction for the new people, because they may not know who you are, guys. So Food Safety Catalyst, what do you do there?
Well, our whole goal is how do we help empower people in food safety and quality to enable business growth? That's what we're here to do, right? Companies hire us to help move products out the door safe and build food safety culture. And that's what we do. We help people step into leadership skills that they maybe need or want to improve to be able to do that easier and better.
Yep, absolutely. And I apologize, Jill, because I kind of threw you off there because you were getting ready for this.
I thought you were going for the mug.
I've already shown mine.
There we go. I love it. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Wonderful. So with that, let's dive into today's topic. And today we are talking about something that I think is really important, and that's networking. And this is something I was really guilty about early in my career, is there's this false belief that if I work really, really hard at what I do, and I become really, really good at what I do, and I get lots of certifications, and I get lots of letters after my name, PQCI, on and on, that management is going to see that and say, oh, wow, Bryan's ready for promotion. And then they promote me. And then it doesn't happen. And some knucklehead who works down the hall gets promoted. And you're like, what? How in the hell does that happen? Right. And it's not enough. Right. And we talk about this on the chat quite a bit, is the skill set and the technical abilities and what you do is super important. But the people side is, I would argue, more important.
Yeah, I agree. You know, a lot of times we're like head down, right? Getting our work done, head down. But after a few years, we look up and it's like, oh, I really don't know the people around me, and they don't know what I'm working on, right?
Yeah.
They can't be advocates for me outside of my circle.
And that's a good point, Tia, because you're working hard doing what you're doing. They're doing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. And coming from I'm an introvert. So even for me, right, there's this dynamic of, well, gosh, I'm just going to kind of stay over here in my space and do my thing. And I'll observe people, but I'll kind of play from, I'm going to say kind of the shadow area. And I was like, gosh, we can't have food safety in the shadows. And every single one of us brings these amazing gifts and perspectives that if we don't engage with our network, everybody loses out on. So we need everybody to be part of this.
Yeah. One thing that's great about Jill and I being partners, Jill's an introvert, I'm an extrovert. And so we have this really unique situation that we can look at situations, right, from different perspectives, right? Because as an extrovert, you would think we're super great at networking. But what you find is that we might just be chatty. We're not talking about the right things, right? We're not really, you don't know how to promote yourself, or you don't know how to, we'll get into a little of this in the conversation, but you don't know how to have those conversations that is actually networking, that afterwards people feel like they know you, they feel like they understand what your goals are, they feel like they understand how they could help you if they have the resources or if they run into a resource. And so that's some of the things that I think everyone misses, but an extrovert can miss, even though it looks like they're networking.
Yeah, exactly. So they get very excited and they're happy to be there, but what was accomplished?
Right.
So with that, really, how would you guys define networking? What is that to you?
Gosh, yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is this intentional curiosity. Because networking is something you do that's intentional. But when you lean in and you're curious about asking different questions, learning about people, asking others for help too, being curious, like where they would go or for feedback, I think that's all part of networking.
Yes, I agree with that. To add in to that, it's understanding how are we all connecting, or being curious about that, right? Like, how are we connected? What things do we have in common, or what things can I learn, right? From you, what interests are you into, right? And I mean, just think about it when you're meeting people and you're asking them what their interests are, even if they're in a different industry, in a different role, right? Like you learn so much. I've never thought about it in that way. Oh, I didn't know people did that type of role, right? Just that learning. And Jill, to your point, just being curious about other people and being genuinely interested in other people and their interests is key.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because what's the favorite topic that people like to talk about? Themselves. So just simply going up and meeting someone at a conference or something and saying, hi, I'm Bryan, and Jill, what do you do? Right. And they're happy to tell you. And when you walk away from that conversation, you may have talked 10% of the time, but you walk away and that person is going, wow, I really like that Bryan guy. He versus, right, you go into the conversation and say, hi, Jill, what do you do? Right. And you start talking, and then that person cuts you off and starts talking about themselves. And you're just like,
right.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point. Networking, sometimes it isn't always the most natural thing, but it is a skill that can be learned. In fact, I even do this with my teenagers. Like when we go someplace, I'm like, I want you to think of 3 questions you can ask when we come into this situation so that you can be conversational and talk with people. That's networking. And actually, well, and I do the same thing when I go to workshops and other places, right? I'm like, okay, what are some things that I know are going to be easy conversation starters so that I can then be confident, because, right, I'm a little bit outside my comfort zone sometimes with networking. May not look like it on the outside, but inside it's happening.
Yeah. I think there's also that other side that someone's going to also ask you, what do you do? Right. And so having, okay, what are the 3 things I want people to know at this place that I'm going to, right? With this people, with these people that I'm interacting, what are 3 things I want to make sure that people understand and know about me?
Right. Well, and Duncan's bringing up a good point here. Networking, quote unquote, isn't a good pursuit because it implies you have a relationship with other professionals that you draw on transactionally. So that's a good point, because part of this as well is you never want to approach this selfishly, right? And thinking that as something dirty. You are approaching this from the standpoint of what can I contribute to this other person? How can I help them? It reminds me, back in my lab days, there was a salesperson that called on us in the laboratory, and she would come in every 3 months or so trying to sell us some lab equipment, or I don't even remember what it was. But she had remembered one little factoid about myself and Frank, the other microbiologist in the lab. So Frank was a huge tennis guy, and I forget what it was for me, Star Trek or something goofy like that. And every time she came in, she would review her file. You could picture her out in her car, right? And then she would come in and say, "Hey, Bryan, did you watch the latest Star Trek? Hi, Frank, how's that backswing?" Right? And it was so phony, right? It was just like, okay.
Yeah.
It's just like, we know, we can see you doing that a mile away, right? So
Right.
I think to Duncan's point, right? You're not doing this necessarily with, ulterior motives or things like this. You're doing this, and part of the strategy around this, because you still need to be intentional about this, right? You need to be able to go in there with objectives. To Tia's point, it's just not going in there to chitty chat, right? You're going in there with some objectives. So there's a balance for sure.
It is, yeah.
There is, and I think that's part of being curious, because right, oftentimes even when we're like, gosh, I really want to meet Bryan, there's a reason behind why I want to meet you. And I think it's okay to bring that forth, especially when we're in professional settings, because that's part of what we do and part of our passion about advancing food safety together. So I think, yes, there is that element of the personal connection, and I hands down think that is where we lead, right? Learning about people. But I think it's also okay to bring that other element. And in fact, I would say sometimes when we don't bring that, that's where we miss out on perhaps the benefits and some of what we can do together, because we're afraid to bring that forth because it feels like network's got a bad name.
Yes. That's such a great point.
Yeah. And think about it. What are we doing right now? Right. I bring guests on the show because you have expertise in areas that I know a little bit about, but you know a lot more than I do, and vice versa, right? We're here sharing our information, and everybody in the chat is doing the same thing. We are networking right now.
Right. Really. I mean, Bryan, that's awesome, because I don't think people think about this as networking, but it is. It is. It's building those relationships, right? And seeing each other, even in the chat, right? Like there's many people that I've met in the chat where I'm watching food safety chat and people are talking, right? And I'm talking with them. Like that is networking. That's a part of networking.
Absolutely. And at the next conference that we're at, I may run into Duncan and be like, "Hey, Duncan." Yeah. And then now we already have a basis for mutual understanding and communication. It's already there.
Yeah. Bryan, I think that also brings up a great point where, you don't have to get everything in the first time you meet someone, right? Sometimes, right? Like some people are like, okay, I'm going in and I'm going to do this. Exactly. But you know what? You might have 3 points, but you might only make it to 1. And that's okay. Follow up, right? Set up some additional time. Oh, I'll see you at the next conference. And then now you have something else to talk about. But it's almost like understanding the flow, right? And understanding that person even. Like that also needs to be top of mind. Because it might take more than once to get everything out, right?
Exactly. And it goes back to 2 key points, right? So one of the things that we say here on the chat a lot is food safety is not a point of competition. We have a loyalty beyond the particular company we're working for, because food safety is everyone. So it's the ice cream industry, it's the produce industry, and there are particular companies that work inside of that umbrella, but everybody's trying to do the same thing. And the other thing that we see under quite a bit is I don't have to know everything. I just have to know the people who do know. Right? Yeah. And so I can pick up the phone and talk to Dr. Doug Marshall over at Eurofins and ask him questions. And we can do the same thing vice versa, right? If there's information I have that he needs. And building those networks and that communication line is critical, because part of it then too is, let's say that there's an opening at Eurofins and Doug goes, Bryan would be really good at that. Right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Right. And because people understand who you are, what you're interested in, right? You've taken that time to build that relationship. You've taken that time to network with one another, right?
Absolutely. And as we talk about here a lot too, is the knowledge side of things is great. But if I'm a jerk, right, and you meet me at the conference and I'm all, hey, right, and you walk away going, Bryan's a jerk, right? That's good information too. right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and that gets into blind spots as well. I may not even know that I'm doing that, but people
Yes,
make, that first impression so critical,
it
and
really
people
is.
make up their minds about you very, very quickly. So you need to understand that as well.
Yeah.
They do. And with that, I would also encourage us each as humans to have a little bit of compassion when it comes to that. Because sometimes when we're in these spaces, right, like workshops or conferences, we're outside our comfort zone. Situationally, we might be a little bit kind of figuring it out. So sometimes we're not always like our authentic self. We're on guard. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes that too is something to say, gosh, you know what? Let's reach out
Mhm.
again and get a little bit more, a one-on-one with them or a virtual coffee or meet them for coffee. Because I think sometimes those first impressions are so important.
Yeah.
But let's face it, we've all had moments where like, yep,
Mhm.
that wasn't my best foot forward.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Yeah.
so if we can have that compassion for each other to say, you know what, let's try it again.
Yeah.
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 Well, part of that too is people are not static, and everybody has their lives. And this goes back to the you're working hard, they're working hard thing that we were talking about earlier. But
Yes.
you don't know what's going on in people's lives. So let's say, for example, my dog is sick and has cancer or something terrible. And it's not true, right? I'm just bringing up an example here. And I'm really worried about my dog. And the dog is going in for, I'm at this conference, and obviously, right, this is flowing over into my presentation of myself. We don't necessarily understand those things of what people are going through. So to your
Yeah.
point, Joel, give a little slack sometimes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Really great point. Really great point.
Yep. And so with that is, there's all kinds, and this is always amazing too, is the it's kind of that old saying of you don't know what you don't know. And with networking, there are so many different options out there what you can do. And
Mhm.
really a good way to kind of start on this is, okay, what interests me, what would I like to learn more about? And you can look at, governmental agencies and these type of things. There's also companies that are
Yeah.
involved in particular systems. There's other people who do things like we do, right? Where you're independent and you're out there working on your own and building your business. And even then you're working with other companies as contractors. So there's agencies out there that hire in consultants to work through their companies as
Right.
contractors. And so there's all these different avenues where all this information can kind of come through, and you need to understand those three main areas, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Understanding like how you play with those areas, right? How you
Yeah.
play within your organization, or if you are self-employed or doing consulting work or have your own business, understanding where you play in that. And as we talk about networking, right, it's really about building those relationships and
Yeah.
understanding what relationship do you have with each person, right? And what relationship do you want to have even with each person? I mean, even when Jill brought up like, oh man, I want to meet Bryan, right? Like there's a reason, like
Yeah.
she said. And so understanding how you can potentially play in that relationship, but also keeping it open, right?
Mhm.
Because you never know how you can help someone and someone can help you.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
Bryan, to your point of like, you don't know what you don't know. I think the
Mhm.
other part is sometimes right, we are creatures of habit. So when we go places, we often will be with people we're comfortable with or that we know. So even thinking about like, how do I expand into a different circle? Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
how do I move into a space where like then I can start learning about the things that I don't know because I've moved outside kind of my safety zone of network circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Megan here has a really good question. I put it up on the screen, but I think then it block you, Tia, so I don't want to do that. How can you best encourage and guide your employees into networking? I feel like it's more natural for me to find others, especially new professionals, and they struggle to get started. Absolutely. And I think kind of what we're talking about here is the basis for that. One of the things that I always did with my teams, Megan, is you have your objectives for your team members, right? You have your departmental goals, and then you break those down into the objectives. And I always built into those a section in there for training and development. And I would have budgetary funds set aside. And what I would do during the reviews is say, okay, Megan, we have X amount of money set aside for training and development. How would you like to use that money? Right. And so I would encourage and push them in cases. And this, of course, varies depending upon what an individual needs. But if I had a highly technical person and all they wanted to do was take certification courses and learn more in depth about what they do, I would push them in that direction and say, well, I'll tell you what, find a conference that you want to go to that's close to what you're interested in. And then we'll set up some objectives of what you can get out of that conference. And then they would go out and do that research and figure out what was of interest to them.
Yeah. I would say, I agree with you, Bryan. I would say also focus on, instead of like networking, right? Focus on how are people building relationships. And teaching them how to build relationships is like the foundation. So understanding, okay, who are my key people? So if you're looking within the organization, right? Who are the key stakeholders that I know I need to build relationships with, right? And then go and start slowly building those relationships and giving tools, right? So Megan, you know this, but at Catalyst, we have a process for building relationship. We call it the 3 Ps. And it's really focused on when you are connecting with someone, you want to understand them from a personal standpoint, what's important to them from a personal standpoint, what's important from them from a professional standpoint, meaning why are you here in this role, right? What excites you about this role? Where do you want to go in your career? And then what's important about priorities for them, right? Like, what are their top priorities? What are they focused on this year, next year, 5 years from now? Just having those basic questions and understanding, right? Like, what's important to them from those 3 standpoints, you're now starting to build that relationship. And think about it from your standpoint, right? Because eventually you're going to have to share your own. Understanding those pieces and just sharing that information, you're starting to build that relationship, which is networking.
It is. And I think, like you just said, I think part of it is how can you create that experience locally and in a space that has low risk? Because it gives a spot for people to be able to practice. And so even across teams, right? How often are we getting a room and we stick with our team? Like, all the food safety people are here and the ops people are there. Like, how do we promote experiences for us to mingle? And what does that look like? But then I also think, Bryan, you brought this up earlier. It's about giving. So even when you are networking, it's like, gosh, how can I support you different? How can I support you better? Asking questions like that takes the pressure off you, because you're asking someone else like, hey, what does this look like? And that's the truest form of kind of the servant leadership. And that's part of, I think, even Duncan, that you're talking about. This is part of building and growing, and we're better together.
Yeah, absolutely. And human beings, we're social animals. And if someone is going into something with selfish objectives, and that becomes really clear very quickly, right? And if you're not going into it with a giving attitude of how can I help this person, they're not going to want to reciprocate, right? You have to go in with a giving mentality and understanding that and approaching that. Because the bottom line here too is, and I like your point here too, Jill, relative to how you approach this, because this applies inside your company too. And the farther you advance in a company, the more important this becomes. And the visual I use on this is like a trench. Right? You're down in the trench and you see the walls of the trench and you're down here doing your thing and stuff like that. The process of growing and understanding how your company functions and how other people are doing things is like climbing out of that trench and looking around. Right? And there's other trenches with other people kind of doing their type of things too. But the people who are the leaders are the people who are climbing out of the trenches and then waving at each other and saying, hey, what do you do? Oh yeah, I'm over here in marketing. What are you doing? Right? And getting to know
the weather
each other.
over there.
Maybe we should dig our trenches together, right?
There's a company I work with quite a bit in my consulting business, and there's a gentleman who works in logistics. Logistics, the trucks and moving around stuff in the warehouse, and that's his trench of what he's doing. No, he has inserted himself into the company in such a way that he is involved in all kinds of stuff. So he is now involved with how the company develops their annual budgeting plan, the cost savings initiatives, the overall strategy. And I'm like, wow. I mean, he has become super, super valuable in that company because he is contributing far beyond what his job description says.
Yes. I think like how he is able to do that, right? It started out with building those relationships or networking, right?
Yes.
Having the organization understand, what am I interested in? Where can I help? right? Where do I want to learn? What am I curious about? You know, when I was working in industry, one of my first jobs, I knew so much about different areas because I was genuinely curious about it. And I knew food safety impacted all areas. So I wanted to know more about, like, how can I help? How can I remove barriers, right? How can we support food safety together? You know, there was even a point where someone was actually in logistics, and I was teaching them how to use their warehouse management system because I just happened to know because of the networking or relationship building I was doing with that department. And so, like, I mean, I didn't know I was going to be in that position, right, where I could help her, but I was able to, right, I just had that knowledge because I was, quote unquote, networking or building relationships with people in areas that I was just curious about.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it actually, in food safety, quality assurance, and these type of areas that we play in, we're very fortunate in that we build systems. And so we get to poke our nose into all kinds of stuff, don't we? Right? It's like, hey, what you doing out here in logistics? Hey, what you doing in the warehouse? What you doing, maintenance guy? Right? We get to look at all this different type of stuff. And that's a golden opportunity then to go in and say, how can I help you with this? And to your point, T, and I think you said this very well, it's not going in there and saying, hey, listen, I know how to do this better.
Right.
No,
you're going to get significant pushback then.
Absolutely.
If you come across as a know-it-all,
no one's going to want to network with you.
No, nobody does. And speaking of networking, Duncan, I love that you talk about these are teachable. Yes, all of these things are things we can learn. And something else we can do, even as new professionals, as someone who wants to get into networking and seasoned people, think about, gosh, when I go to a conference, I need to get better at this. But is there someone that, like, who can I, like, bring along with me? I've been fortunate to walk around, like, show floors with people who are known by everybody. And what they did was every time we met someone, they'd be like, gosh, do you know Jill yet? Hey, let me introduce you. And so that's something we can do for each other as well to really help kind of navigate in that space and pass it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look at just the networking and the connections we would be able to develop with the chat. Did I know Austin before the chat? No, I didn't. Right. And I was able to learn about his amazing business and what he's doing in training and things like this. And every opportunity I have, if someone is looking in that space of what he's doing, who do I send him to? Right. I send him to Austin. Right.
Yeah. And one thing to call out, right, and we all know with COVID, many of us, right, met online and hadn't worked with each other, right, including myself and Jill. That's how Catalyst got started, where we had never even met each other in person. So even from a networking perspective, it doesn't have to be in person, right? Like, how are you connecting over the phone? How are you connecting through LinkedIn? How are you connecting through your communications channel at work, right? Like, you don't have to work in the same space, in the same area, seeing each other face to face.
Yeah.
Amazing things can come from that.
Yeah, exactly. And here's an amazing little tidbit as well. Recruiters, you'll get messages from recruiters, or they'll call you at work or things like this. And a lot of people are like, hey, recruiters, hey, man. Oh my goodness, do not pass that up. Build networks with recruiters. Yeah. They're working hard and they have connections and things like this. And it works both ways. So I've used for my entire career now, I've found 2 or 3 good recruiters that, again, are good people that I like, that are ethical, and I enjoy working with. And it works both ways. When I had opportunities that I needed to fill, I knew exactly who to call. If I was looking around for things, right, I knew who to talk with, and I knew that they would be discreet and deal with things appropriately. And boy, you talk about people who know everybody, it's recruiters.
Yes.
It is. And I think early on in my career, if I'd get a call from a recruiter, that was my initial response, Bryan. I'd be like, oh, gosh, I don't need this right now, or I'm busy. I'm not looking for anything.
Right.
Now, and then as I grew, I was like, you know what? This is once again where we get to help each other. So even today, when somebody says, hey, I think this job would be perfect for you, call me. And I'm like, hey, thanks. You know what? I'm not interested, but have you checked with this person? Here's someone that I might know. I think when we can connect people that way, it's also giving, it's connecting. You know what?
Absolutely.
It never hurts to be able to be helpful and lead with kindness.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly how I've used my circle of recruiters, right? Where I have friends that's like, I'm looking for a new position. Oh, I know some recruiters you should talk with because they're connected here, there, right? Like that. I mean, many times throughout my career, I've connected people to recruiters that are looking for a new position. Right? I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't spent time building that part of my network.
Right. And recruiters are people too. And if you treat them fairly and you help them do their jobs, right, they're going to remember you and they're going to say, oh gosh, yeah, Tia, I haven't heard from her in a while. I think I've got something that she may be interested in. Right?
Absolutely.
100%. And so part of this is one of the lessons I would always teach my team members is, and write this down, guys, never burn a bridge in this business. We work in a super small world. And the farther you advance in your career, the smaller it gets. And people know you. And even if you've never met them, they know you by reputation or things like this. There are people on the chat that we may never have the opportunity to meet. But as Duncan was saying here, right, with my mug and things like this, right, we learn about each other. And even though we've never met in person, we learn these things. And if you burn bridges, that person that you slighted or did something, they could become your boss one day.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just important to just think about how do you treat people, right? Like when Jill was talking about, do you give people compassion, right? Are you curious about people? Do you treat people the way that they want to be treated, right? When you focus on those things, right, like that comes back to you, and people know, right? Like people, I mean, think about the things that audience you've heard where you quote unquote know someone, but you've never talked to them, you've never interacted with them, but it's because of the stories that are coming to you. And sometimes, right, that perception, that person might not feel like that is them, right? But we all know people's perception is true, right? That's what they believe. And so you will have to work to change that perception if you want to, but really focusing on that and understanding. It's almost like what type of brand do you want, right? Like when someone says Tia Glave, what do I want them to think about, right? Like what is the first thing, the two things, three things I want them to think about when they hear my name?
Absolutely. And so Jill did a very good job of this earlier in the chat when I said, Jill, what is it that Catalyst does, right? That's her elevator pitch, right? Because when you talk with someone, this is natural, right? You meet someone at a conference. Hi, Tia, my name is Bryan. How are you? What do you do? Tell me a little bit about you, right? And then you begin talking about yourself. The next thing out of your mouth is, and what do you do, Bryan? Right? That's how a conversation works. So if I come back and say, oh, well, I kind of do some stuff, and right, you're going to be like, okay, I've got to go over here. There's someone I saw over there I need to talk with. I'll see you later, Bryan. And I'm like, oh, right.
That's why having those couple questions, like, hey, what do you like most about the workshop conference event so far?
Yeah.
Like, just some basic things sometimes help so that it bridges that I'm going to say kind of that awkward moment where you're like, to kind of help you get into the next space. It's just some of that preparation and being intentional.
That practice. But I will also say, like, listen. So one of the things that that we experienced at IFP when we were there as Catalyst talking about what we do, someone said to us, wow, you are the applied part of food safety culture. And that just made so much sense to us, right? So it's like even having conversations with people and talking with them about what you do. And then it's like, oh, okay, yes, this is the way that I understand it. And sometimes you're like, ooh, that's good, right? That's good. And it helps you continue to refine that brand, right? That brand of yourself. But you only get there if you're having conversations, right? If you're building those relationships, if you're meeting people different than yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the benchmarks I use for this, so after this and in the food safety course, and I'll talk about this a little bit toward the end as well, is I take this information and I put it in a program and I create a transcript of this conversation. And that way people who want to read through it, who get information that way, can do it that way. But one of my benchmarks on this, Tia, is it also then gives me keywords and these type of things for the conversation. And one of the benchmarks I use for a successful conversation is a percentage of speaker. So if I see during the conversation that I'm speaking 60% and my guest is speaking 40%, that's a failure. I want my guest to be speaking 50% or more than I'm speaking. If I'm dominating the conversation, no, that's not right. This show is for the guests. One of my main roles here is to be the facilitator of your expertise and help bring that out. And being conscious of that and recognizing, if you're dominating a conversation, no, it's a back and forth, right? So you need to be able to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's such a good point, especially as you're building relationships, right? Really being curious about the other person means asking open-ended questions, right? And allowing them to answer and have conversation. And if you're dominating that, right, they probably know a little bit more about you, but you really don't know that much about them.
Right, exactly.
I love the old saying about we have one mouth and two ears for a reason.
True. Right?
True.
And that's part of the reason why here at the beginning of the chat is we ask people where they are in the world, right? Because everybody brings these unique perspectives. So for example, Mohammed is in Oman, right? Another part of the world, a completely different experience. How fascinating is that, right? And to be able to make those connections here is just amazing. And it doesn't all have to be work, right? I don't have to, at a conference, it doesn't have to be, hi, have you read the latest version of the FDA directive on whatever? Okay. It can be something a little more social. So Darren's here on the chat. So immediately what comes to mind for me, and I've been talking about this on LinkedIn a lot, is have you seen Poisoned? Right? And if you haven't in the audience, Netflix, watch Poisoned.
Well, you know what? That's like another conversation starter, right? Like, what are the topics that are happening in the space that you're entering? Know a little bit about that, refresh on it if you need to, and be ready, right, with those 3 questions that you want to ask the network. But you have to prepare for that, right? You have to be intentional. You have to be ready to talk about those top topics.
Right. And so part of this is deciding where you would like to be, because we have limited time. And like my training budget example, limited money, because going to conferences and stuff like that ain't cheap.
Yeah.
So figuring out what you want to do. And there's a universe of different opportunities out there for you. So I tried to put together some here. I'm sure there's more. So guys in the chats, if I'm missing some big ones, kind of let me know. So kind of the first group I kind of thought of was academic groups. So think American Society for Quality, IFT. Those are some big ones. Universities. There's some big universities out there that have good food programs, right, with young up and coming students. So North Dakota, Ohio State, these type of schools that have fantastic programs in these spaces. What are they doing out there that you could potentially be involved with?
Yeah, and even as an alumni, right? Like using your alumni network. And this is something that's like top of my mind because I don't do it as well as I should. But alumni networks exist. And you can tap into that alumni network. And some schools are better than others, right? Of keeping that list, right? And understanding where people are. But there's almost always something that you can do. And that's when you're building relationships, right? And looking for those common threads. Having a common alma mater, right? That's like, oh, that's something right there that you can connect with and have a conversation about, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Those commonalities. And again, we're people, right? So those things are important. Another good one that I came up with was the different standards and things of this nature. So SQF, GFSI, PMO, right? So the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance and 3A standards. There's all these different groups out there. IFISH, right, which is associated with PCQI. Right now we're getting into all this alphabet soup again. And so, when I was with White Wave Foods and Dean Foods, I was a representative for those companies on the SQF Technical Advisory Council. And I did that for like 6 years. And when I left and became a consultant, I was vice chair of that group. Fantastic opportunity. And the people that I met and the people who were on the committee with me, other heads of companies and things of this nature, I still maintain those relationships to this day. Super valuable because they are good people, right? And we're able to share information and work together to this day.
Absolutely. This is a great place for technical experts to lean into, right? Because it's almost like a safe space. You have an area that you're comfortable about, right? Like, so you're talking about 3A standards. You understand the standards, right? You might be an expert at your organization. And then now you're interacting with other experts and you have this common thread that you're comfortable with, which is your technical knowledge. But then you really get to practice those other things, right? Around having conversations and bringing up some personal stuff, right? And bringing up stuff that's outside of your current job and kind of practicing those things, but still in your area that you feel comfortable in.
Yeah. Duncan is killing your. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and you might not always feel comfortable. I know the first time I volunteered to help lead an industry group or be part of a committee, I was like, ugh, what can I all contribute? There are some fantastic people here already. What can I add? Or I even had the moments of like, gosh, I don't know that many people here. Well, guess what? I know lots of people now because I raised my hand and said, you know what? I'm going to throw my name in the hat and I'm going to be part of this. And it doesn't mean it's a life commitment because I too like to network and move into different spaces so that I can learn more and learn the things that or hopefully be exposed to things I don't know that I don't know. But it's a great opportunity to be able to, represent your company, represent yourself, your personal brand, and also then contribute once again to the greater community of our food industry or other industries or areas that you're interested in.
Yeah. And so part of this too, right, is so standards such as SQF and BRC, they have conferences and they have committees that develop the curriculum for the conference, right? Ton of work to get these things, right? All the stuff that needs to be done behind the scenes for a conference, huge. And so people come together and volunteer and they help SQFI or whoever it is to create their conference. And guess what those committees need? They need speakers. Hey, Bryan, would you like to do a section here at the SQF conference? Oh, yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. And that may be something you want to do or not. And here's what's very interesting as well is it's kind of one of those dichotomies. We were talking about personality styles, introverts and extroverts and things like this. So Jill and I are introverts. Do introverts have trouble giving presentations? No. Right? Because it's different. It's so getting up and giving a presentation, I have no problem with that. It's actually the chitty chat afterwards that's hard, right? Because it's that one-on-one interaction and being aware of those blind spots, which we really haven't talked about very much yet, but being aware that, okay, right, I can give my presentation, I'm fine with that. Afterwards, I need to people are going to have questions for me and they're going to want to talk with me afterwards. Great, that's why I'm here. Right. And understanding that is really important.
Yes.
Austin, I love Duncan Lacey is on fire. Yes.
Oh, yeah. He's killing
love that you're giving these like new perspectives or, just sharing, like there are so many opportunities and sometimes that can be overwhelming. So if somebody's wondering where to start, pick one thing, try one.
Yep. Another good one is trade associations. So if you're working in an industry, odds are you have a trade association. So there's trade associations for dairy and produce and beef and you name it, right? They're out there. Doug Marshall is very involved with refrigerated foods. He's on their board and he's on the chat here every now and then. And he's very involved in helping that group. Getting involved with those trade associations, man, you talk about a good way to meet other people in what you do, trade associations.
Absolutely. And it's a wealth of knowledge, right? For you to understand, like Jill said, what do I not know, right? And how do you figure that out, right? Because you're just not going to know that being in your own circles. This opens up new circles for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of what Duncan is saying here, and this kind of gets into the blind spot piece that I mentioned earlier. So first off, blind spots, there are things that we all do that we are completely unaware of. But other people immediately pick up on with us. And that's one of the advantages in companies, or if you're in a company type situation, you have a team or things like this, you have these 360 reviews and peer reviews and things like this, is to help you identify those blind spots. So the one I mentioned on the chat here before for me, which was a huge one for me, was when I work and I would be looking at my computer like I'm doing right now, I had a tendency to make a face like this. I was concentrating on what I was doing. And when people would come to my office and poke around the door to talk with me, they assumed that I was mad or angry about something. And they'd be like, "Oh, ooh, I'm not going into Bryan's office. I'll talk with him later, I guess. I had no idea. I had no idea until somebody told me that, Bryan, are you mad? I'm like, no, why? Well, you look mad. Oh, crap. I had no idea.
Right.
And when you find those things, your reaction should not be embarrassment. It should be awesome. I have identified a gap that I didn't know about. Now I know about it. I didn't know that I didn't know, and now I know.
Absolutely.
Even if that's not your first reaction, because often our ego kicks in first, the protection, right? Like, well, why would they say that? Like you said, or so go through that phase, have that moment, and then be like, ah, awesome.
And then also sharing it with others, right? Like there's sometimes it's like when I'm thinking, that's my face, right? Yeah. And so it's one of those things that as you share that with people would then start to recognize that face as, oh, okay, Tia's thinking. Thinking. Hey, I see that face. You're thinking, is this a good time? Yes, come on in, right? So it's also one of those things on how do you share that information with others so that they'll learn even more about you. Right. And how you behave in different situations.
Yep. And so the last category I had here as well, and Duncan's teasing me about my sipping from cups. Okay. I'm going to learn from that. So, but the other good group is what we're LinkedIn. My goodness. Right. LinkedIn, other groups like this, my locals group, right. Which again is free. And I'll put the link in there for these type of things, sharing that information and cross-reacting in ways that we have no idea, right? I spoke at a conference for Washington State, right? That's another one. It's these schools conferences, right? I went to a conference and spoke, and afterwards, I think I had about 4 people come up to me and say, "Oh, I know you from that thing on LinkedIn."
Yes.
How cool is that?
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, I think Jill was alluding to this earlier too, on like when you join these groups, right? Like you might feel like, oh, do I have anything to add? You know, you don't have to necessarily add right away too, right? Like go in, listen, understand the group, ask questions, right? Like people know that this is your first time here, right? Like everyone's aware of that, that's been there. So just listen. You know, be a part of it. You don't necessarily have to say anything the first time you're there. Networking, building relationships, that happens over time. You don't have to get everything out the first time.
No. And it's all contextual, right? As you're starting out in your career, of course you don't have a network yet, right? And these things take a ton of time to build and build and build over time. And then it becomes, you become the person who is helping the next generation come along, which is part of the reason why we do this, right? Why we do the chat is to help make these connections and help other people do these things. And it's kind of a tangent for our conversation, but I do want to throw this in as kind of a little bonus thing for everybody is Jill and Tia, have you guys heard about informational interviewing? Yeah.
Say more.
I'll be curious to see if people in the chat have heard of this as well. So this is learning about a new industry. So you can actually call up companies and say, hi, my name's Bryan and I'm interested. It can be something completely different than what you do and that you're curious about, and find someone in that company and interview them. Again, what do people like talking about? Themselves, right? So I'm a young buck out of school, starting off in my career, and I want to learn more about something. If you contact somebody and say, hi, Jill, I understand that you work in this company and you're an expert in this particular topic. I would love to learn more about that and do an informational interview with you. Wow. You're going to be flattered, right? You're like, what? Really? Okay, fine. And then ask them about those and show curiosity and building those connections. Now, all of a sudden you've developed a new linkage in an area you had nothing before. And now things start branching out. Exactly. And at some point in the future, Jill may be like, hey, that Bryan guy working over in that dairy industry, I've got some openings in my area that he may be interested in. Now you've established a connection, right? Because, and this is key, right? Is resumes are simply just an introduction. It's the people side of things that are the important side. We hire people, we don't hire resumes. And building those networks so that people understand, Bryan knows what he's talking about in these areas, and Bryan is someone I would like to work with.
Yeah, that's a really great tool. I think it's also a great tool to practice, right? It kind of takes the pressure off. You know, you're going to be asking questions, right? You can get a feel for how they're going and pivot, right? If you need to, modify if you need to. I think that's a really great tool to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And super important in those things. So, I mean, guys, we've covered a ton of material here relative to networking. So let's try and kind of circle back around on this and summarize. So number one, hopefully we're all in agreement now that networking is not a dirty word, right? It's not, you have some sneaky ulterior motive and you're trying to get something from somebody and trick them or something like this.
Right.
No, you're building mutual relationships for mutual benefit. And that's what the world's about. We're social animals, and these are the things that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one point that Duncan brought up, he was talking in the chat a little bit about like professional relationships and social relationships and the difference between them. You know, one thing that I like to do is that when I'm quote unquote networking, or, you know, I really like the term building relationships a little bit better. When I'm doing that in my social life versus my professional life, it's actually very similar. Right? Like I might talk about different things, right? But how I'm approaching someone new, right? Like just think about, we were talking about joining an association, right? Or joining a committee. Think about the time that you first showed up on your college campus, right? Like you probably only knew a very small piece of a very small group of people, or depending on where you went, maybe you didn't know anyone. Right? Like how did you build those relationships over time, right? You learned about people, you gave a little about yourself, right? I am the same probably in both. It's just the topics are a little different, right? And you're still picking up on where you're meeting people, right? Like if I meet someone socially at a bowling alley, right? Like that conversation is different if I meet someone at IFT, right? So but the way I show up is very similar in both situations. And he had mentioned too, like maintenance of your network, right? Which is so important. And we didn't really talk about it today, is that you do have to have maintenance. You do need to reach out and say, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. What's going on? Let's set up some time. Right. And you can't do that for your whole network. Right. But think about like, who are those top people that you want to make sure that you touch base with? You know, is there someone you're touching base with monthly? Is there someone you want to touch base with once a year? Right. Like know who those people are and make sure you're doing that maintenance in professional and personal.
Yep. It's the same. People are people.
And it's intentional. So when you talk about like what it is, networking is intentional.
Yes.
I don't think, you know, it's not our natural response to be like, gosh, I'm just going to fall into networking. It takes us to typically go, I'm moving into this space and how do I want to experience it? What am I hoping to add and give here? That's part of networking. So be intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. This comment made me smile here.
Experiences.
So Smith had a comment here. Yesterday, someone in my son's school told me he had a grown man's face. I was confused for a second until I looked at my washing hands and focusing on something. Some people think I'm not personable when they first meet me, right?
So you're washing your hands,
right? It's my angry face working, right?
Yes.
Right.
Well, like now you know, right? Now you know, and what are you going to intentionally do, right? So that people would know, hey, I am personable, right? And I do want to meet people. Sometimes it might be that you need to make the move first, right? Because of just the vibes, right? That you are, and that's just who you are. Let me go and speak first. And honestly, as you become leaders in an organization, just know if you're a VP of organization, everyone might not be flocking to you because you're a VP of the organization and they don't know what they want to talk about and that type of thing. How do you, and I think that's that compassion, right? How do you have compassion for people around you? And even say, right, if you feel comfortable, hey, I'm gonna stop and say, hey, how are you? What's your name? Let's have a conversation. Oh, or do your homework before. Oh, Jill, you work in this area. I've definitely seen your name. Tell me a little bit more about the projects you're working on.
Yeah. And it's always remembering the context. So I did not spring full form as a VP of QA, right? It took decades to grow into that career. And I came from somewhere and I had my faults and my mistakes and my growth along the way too. They're just people like everybody else. Right? So keeping that in mind is really important. Oh, and by the way, this is for you, Duncan. Yum, yum, yum.
Well, and along those lines, Bryan, right? We always talk about as technical people, we often are champion for bringing our technical expertise. When we do development, it's usually technical. We're going to a technical conference. We're going to an industry conference. We're getting our next certificate. Leadership typically isn't something that's like high on the development list, or it's short-term versus long-term.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, I'm playing right into that's part of why Tia and I do what we do at Catalyst, because building these relationships and being a great leader takes time and practice and someone to help you come back to go like, yep, let's remember to do it and be intentional. Otherwise, we're just doing the to-do list and checking things off.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And really highlighting the practice, and reflection. You know, that's one of the things that the way that we structure our programs, and the reason why we don't call our programs training is because it's not actually training. You're not going through getting this knowledge and then you're going away to figure out how to apply it. We actually talk about, right, like what are these concepts? Actually practice the concept, reflect on, okay, what do I need to modify the next time? What worked? What did not work? Who do I need to bring into the fold with me, right? Like reflecting and then going out and practicing again. And that's really important. It's something that we really value within our programs and at Catalyst, because that's how things stick, right? That's how they become a habit for you.
And it's the long game, because like you said, Bryan, we've been through this. We had to do kind of the hard way, figuring it out, screwing it all up. And yes, we'll all still do that. But it's so nice when you have something to help you, so it makes it easier and faster.
Yeah. Well, it kind of comes back to, and there's a reason why there's lots of sayings and cliches in these type of spaces. And a big one for me is, show me that you care before you tell me what you know.
That's a big one. That's a big one, right? And something that, you know, without those leadership skills, technical experts, we fall into all the time. We're just ready to come in, get to work, right? Come in, get to work. When in reality, there's a period of time that you have to spend building relationships. There's time that you have to spend understanding, right? Like what other people care about, so that they can see that you care, right? And sharing those values and the beliefs and all of those things about what makes us a whole person. That's so important. And honestly, we don't spend enough time on it, which is why Catalyst exists, to help you prioritize that.
Yeah, perfect way to end our chat here for today. So what's going on in Catalyst? Anything coming up that you would like everybody to know about?
Oh, yes. So we are always super busy. But one of the things we want the audience to know is that we have opened our fall boot camp. And so we are so excited about it. It starts September 12th. So you can find information on our website, or feel free to email us. Our emails are are part of our name. So email us. We're happy to send you a free preview of our first module to get a feel for what boot camp is all about. And we're happy to send you also a module outlines. You know, we have all the information if you would like to see it. But one thing that is like critical within boot camp is we talk about all the things that we talked about today, and really help you build those skills on how do I build relationships? How do I increase my circle of influence, right? How do I show up with the right mindset? How do I build safe spaces? You know, so we talk about those things at boot camp. We practice those things and reflect on those things at boot camp. So if you are struggling with these skills, join us at boot camp.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Very nicely said. And so on my side, so of course, right, the new food safety chat database is now out. Yay. Right. And so all this information is being compiled and sorted by topic and speakers. And we have now transcripts, as I talked about before, these videos. We have podcasts of the conversation so you can listen in your car. We have the notes, the information that I gathered to prepare for these topics. Sometimes we have extra bonus material as well, too. And so that's now available, and you can go to Locals, and I've got a link in there. And if you reach out to me, I can give you the information too. And for a limited time here, I'm also doing a discount. So a 25% launch discount for my friends who see this and contact me, and I'll give you that link so you can get that information. Lifetime access. And every time a new chat comes, I add it to the information. So it's this continuing growing database of expertise like you're seeing here today. So let me throw this in the chat here. So here's the Locals link.
Well, and once again, those are the things that are so helpful when we're working in this space, because The more we know, the more we lean into the spaces that we don't know, and have someone help us guide through that, the easier and faster we can have the results that we want to see.
Exactly. Accelerate your growth. Don't try and do it all on your own. That's what we talk about here as well. Another thing that's really exciting I'm talking about as well, get my finger going right here, is my book there in the background. I'm updating my book. I'm revising my book. And with that, I'm also doing an audiobook of it as well. So hopefully here within a month or so, that'll be ready. So when that is, I'll let everybody know on that side too. So it's like, excited about that.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. That's awesome.
Good.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so with that, we'll close out our chat for today. Time flies, but hopefully this was helpful for everyone. Super important topic if you can't tell, right? Very important. You can't dismiss this in your career no matter what you do. Being able to get outside your bubble and build your network, contribute and help other people, that's what it's all about. So thank you everybody here. And just the kick-ass comments here today, amazing. So thank you everybody for joining and participating and networking here today with us. So we will see you back here next Friday for the next food safety chat, same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter for the next food safety chat. So everybody, in the meantime, you did a great job this week. Enjoy your weekend, relax, have some fun, and we will see you back here next Friday. Thanks again, Jill and Tia. Amazing chat.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody later.
Bye.